Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time for us to start. Thank you again very much for joining us today. We have a very interesting discussion that we are going to have, which is very relevant and topical for now. I'll quickly introduce myself and our panelists here, and then the session is going to be a question and answer session between the panelists. For about 20 to 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. After that, we will open it up for any questions that you may want to ask. Please use the question and answer tool that is available at the bottom of your screens to ask questions, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can once the panel discussion is over. So without further ado, my name is Jahan Zebawan. I'm the founder and CEO of J1 Partners in Azika. We are a regulatory compliance, risk management, and internal audit consulting firm. Azika is a regulatory technology firm as well, headquartered out of Dubai in the IFC, with locations across 7 different cities, including London, Toronto, Saudi Arabia, and Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Karachi, and Doha. Joining us today from our team are Mohammed Clyde. Mohammed is a manager in our compliance team. Prior to joining us, Mohammed was a supervisor with the Central Bank of Bahrain, responsible for authorizing some of the virtual assets firms that the CBB has considered and have approved or was considering. With us also is Dapo Ako. Dapo is our deputy CEO and runs our compliance practice. He's also very heavily involved in the virtual assets business and is also a board member of the Middle East, Asia, and Africa Crypto and Blockchain Association. What I would request now is for potentially Dapo or Mohammed to quickly lay out who is VARA, what is VARA's mandate, what are some of the key services that VARA will regulate, or businesses that VARA will regulate. And then there are a few questions that I think the team has prepared for you to drive the conversation. So over to you, Dapo and Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Jahan Zeban. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Hopefully we have a really interesting session. It's one where, as Jahan Zeb says, a panel of questions, and hopefully we get some further questions from the audience, and hopefully have a really interesting session. Virtual assets continues to be very topical globally, not just in the UAE, but it's one where I passionately say that the UAE has gradually become the capital, so to speak, of virtual assets and a home to many virtual asset service providers. And it is with that in mind that the decree establishing VARA came to be last year. And, as Jahan Zeb says, we will go through how VARA was set up, the scope of VARA, the processes to get licensed, and hopefully that will give a good insight into VARA. So we use the word VARA. I'm sure most people know what VARA is the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, which is established in the Dubai Emirates, and have the scope for regulating all virtual assets activities in the Emirates of Dubai. And with that, I will ask Mohammed the first question around the activities and the scope of VARA. What type of licenses or activities is VARA covering within the Emirates?
Thank you, Dapo. In terms of activities, VARA regulates advisory services, brokerage services, custody, exchanges, lending, payment and remittance, management and investment services, in addition to regulating issuance of virtual assets in the Emirate of Dubai.
Fantastic. Looks like quite a wide scope of activities that VARA is into and looks to oversee. But I suppose one thing before we get into the technical details, especially when we talk about anything virtual assets related, is often what are the basic requirements that I, as a virtual asset service provider, need to satisfy. And I think one of the topical things is the AML. Always comes up in all of those discussions. What are the general compliance requirements when it comes to AML in VARA?
So licensees, companies licensed by VARA will have to abide by the UAE federal AML laws. They would additionally have to develop their own AML policies and procedures, which will be reviewed by VARA. In brief, they will have to comply with these regulations. Yes.
Yeah. So in other words, we're expecting all licensees, prospects to align with FATF requirements and whatever global standards that apply elsewhere. Going into the detail about VARA as a regulator, we know that at the onset, there was a cohort of key market participants who participated and were engaged with VARA towards the formalization and finalization of the rules that were released earlier this year. And as part of that process, there was what we call the minimum viable product license, which is, I call that the MVP. Now, since the launch of the full market product license, which was launched on 7th of February, what does this mean for all of the MVP authorizations that had been made or submitted prior to the 7th of February?
So on February 7th, as you're aware, VARA revamped its licensing process and launched the full market product license. Prior to February 7th, applicants had to undergo through a 3-stage process to acquire the MVP operational license. Currently, applicants that have applied prior to that date will be advised by VARA whether they can continue in that licensing process or will have to transition and apply for a full market product.
Interesting. So if we assume that I am running I have a company that's offering services in virtual assets in the Emirates of Dubai, does that mean that I need to have a VARA license? Well,
first of all, you're actually invited and advised by VARA to fill out an information disclosure questionnaire as soon as possible. So this questionnaire deadline is on 30th April. Applicants who are already engaged in virtual assets need to provide a business plan, that information on the type of activities they're engaged in addition to financial information on the shareholders, ultimate beneficiary owners, and other relevant data, and submit that questionnaire before the deadline, end of this month.
Oh, so that means it's an interesting 2 weeks then for participants of the MVP process. And taking that a step further and looking into new players, as we know, we as a firm constantly get prospective applicants to VARA ask the questions around what are the steps for new players who were not part of the MVP and are interested in setting up in Dubai. What steps do they need to go through to get that FMP, the full market product license?
Okay. Once the type of activity that the company wants to engage in has been identified, the company should proceed to fill out this information disclosure questionnaire. Again, prepare a business plan, prepare financial projections, provide audited financials, shareholder details, relevant data. This will be submitted to the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, which will review it and provide you with its feedback. If your activities fall within the scope of the regulated activities that are under VARA, VARA will grant you an initial approval to prepare and submit a full application deck, including policies and procedures, any other requirements that VARA will have outlined in that initial approval. VARA will then proceed to review that information. They may ask questions along the way, but if they are satisfied with the full deck of information, they will issue the full market product license.
Well, that's interesting. Somewhat similar to what we see elsewhere, and I know from engagement that we have had with VARA, the intention again is to, as applicants go through that process, is to ensure that the submissions are as complete as possible, so that allows VARA to get through the review of the application process pretty quickly. Now, we know that there were certain restrictions in place when it comes to the customer base for the cohorts that already have, or those who already have the MVP license. What changes for those who are going to get the full license?
So, as you're aware, the MVP process was a trial and a testing period of how the regulation will work, how the activities can be undertaken and supervised. So, prior to February 7th, MVP license holders were restricted to marketing their product to professional clients and market counterparties. This has been changed after February 7th. In the full market product license, now companies can market their product to all type of customers, including retail customers.
Interesting. I'm sure that is welcome news to many stakeholders. When setting up in VARA, as with many other jurisdictions, and the UAE is peculiar for those who are not conversant with the various authorities, onshore, free zone, etc. When it comes to setting up or incorporating your company, does that have to be based in the Dubai World Trade Center where VARA is based, or can you set up the company anywhere else within the UAE?
That's an important note. So companies wishing to have a VARA license, they may set up in Dubai World Trade Center. However, they are not obliged to. They may incorporate their company in any of the free zones in the Emirate of Dubai, excluding Dubai International Financial Center, or set up in onshore Dubai.
Okay, fantastic. And almost going back to the first or second question that we did ask on the session, which had to do with on being able to undertake multiple activities as a licensee. That is, I am a company, I've requested for the FMP, and I'm allowed to combine different activities, whether that's investment management or I want to do exchange, brokerage, whatever that is. What is the application fee that applies to each activity? Do I have to pay a full application fee per activity, or is there a bouquet, almost so to speak, based on the activities that I apply for?
So in the launching the FMP regulations, VARA have shown openness to combining more than one regulated activity under an overarching license. The only exception to this is custody services. Custody services have to be undertaken under a separate and distinct legal entity with its own license, to ensure segregation, to ensure avoidance of conflict of interest. In terms of the application fee, So applicants who who wish to undertake more than one activity will have to will pay a license extension fee, which is 50% of the amount of the lower amounts between the two application fees. Yes, in order to encourage companies to set up.
So that's a really interesting one. I know we've just talked about the fees, but I think a topical or really important thing to pull out of the response you just provided was the assertion that if you are providing custody, that has to be in a separate entity versus, from any other activity that you wish to undertake as a prospective licensee. In that scenario where you have to have two separate entities, does VARA allow or have any consideration for, say, sharing of resources between those entities?
In our communication with VARA, they have stated that they do not object to such combination of roles, subject, of course, to providing an approval request supported by good justification, and provided that these roles can be effectively conducted by the same individual. However, this is more of a case-to-case basis that depends on the strength of the approval request. Yes.
So in other words, the systems and controls around those resources, so to speak, will determine on a case-by-case basis. The strength of that will determine whether or not that is acceptable to VARA in considering that request. Thanks for that. We've spoken about the regulated activities that can be undertaken at VARA. But I want to digress slightly to talk about the issuance of virtual assets in Dubai, and whether, again, VARA approval or permission is requested for the issuance of virtual assets.
Actually, VARA is unique among the regulators in the UAE in if you seek to issue a virtual asset, you do not need to apply for an FMP license or pursue one of the regulated activities. You can so the type of issuance, the process will depend on the issuance itself. So some forms of issuance will require pre-approval from VARA prior. And the other kind of tokens will require registration and registration with VARA and a notification to the regulatory authority. So for tokens that require pre-approval, there is specific approval requirements. There is also, depending on the nature of the issuance, the scale of the issuance, the intended business purpose of the issuance, in addition to the nature of tokens that are issued, that will determine what kind of process will be undertaken by VARA.
Oh, thanks for that. And going further into the issue around the issuance of tokens or coins, what type of coins require approval from VARA?
So tokens that are transferable, tokens that have speculative nature, can be used for trading, can be used additionally as a payment tool, will have to undergo the approval process. So as you can suspect, this definition is pretty comprehensive, and it will include tokens such as stable coins, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, including a big range of utility tokens as well. So Yes, basically a big scope of tokens will require pre-approval. The pre-approval have to be supported by a white paper. And additionally, it will have to be supported by a risk assessment, in addition to a proof that AML controls are in place to monitor the use of the tokens. So this is in brief the requirements.
Indeed. So traceability indeed very important as part of what you mentioned there. Let us assume for a minute that I'm a business or a company, and I trade on my own account in virtual assets. Do I require a VARA license to undertake or conduct this activity?
If you seek to pursue the issuance of tokens that do not meet the approval criteria, that these kind of tokens, again, should not be transferable, should not be speculative nature. This kind of tokens will require a registration and a notification to the authority. Additionally, it should be supported by a white paper and a statement confirming that adherence to the conduct of business principles in the VARA rulebooks.
And if you allow me, I would like to. I would like to add a comment here. Yes. So I think it's important. Basically, there are two parts to the licensing process. There's an approval and there's a registration. And if you are trading under a proprietary setup, and if you have trading volume of 250 million or more, VARA generally requires you to basically register yourself with VARA, and there's a registration process. Under 250 million, you are not required to register, although you can voluntarily register. And some of the other businesses that are service providers can also voluntarily register with VARA. But I think it's a volume driven requirement for registration. Approval, obviously, if you are conducting any type of regulated activity for a third party, that you obviously pushes you into an approval scenario.
Thanks, Jan. And I think from my understanding that there is the 3 working days grace from when you've invested that same amount for which you need to have requested that or made the registration of that. Look, there's so many key dates, that are in the calendar for anyone who's looking to set up in VARA, and trying to remember those dates can be a bit of a challenge in itself. Can you outline some of those key dates for some of the people in the audience to get a grasp of? Happily.
So for existing virtual asset providers that are operating in the Emirate of Dubai, there is the deadline to submit the information disclosure questionnaire, which is at 30 April, so ending of this month. If the information is, if the questionnaire is not submitted by that deadline, VARA will require you to cease all virtual asset services by 30 June of this year. And finally, for existing MVP applicants, VARA has stated a timeline where they seek that these applicants obtain their FMP. These applicants obtain finish their licensing process before 31st of August.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thanks for that, Mohammed. I think one of the key things we hear a lot in conversations with prospective clients and clients alike is staking. And one of the questions we often get is we know that from the VARA rules, an a license that is a licensee that has management and investment services can offer staking services. Can an exchange or broker offer that as well? And if possible, what does that entail?
The answer is yes. They can offer staking services, brokers or exchanges or other type of licenses can engage in staking activities, subject to adding the activity of management and investment to their application. So VARA has shown openness for staking, and applicants will just need to request that additional activity if they want to provide it.
Excellent, excellent. Now, another thing that's quite topical and has, been discussed with many alike is around payment and remittance services for opening digital wallets, issuing prepaid cards, etc. Is that something that is already live, VARA?
So the license for payments and remittance already exists in the regulatory framework for VARA. However, the regulations are still in the works. We continue to keep an eye on regulatory developments, and if that's issued, yeah, we will definitely go through it. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. One of the things that's important for a lot of market participants, and maybe I'll ask, I'll open this to Jehanzeb also to shed some light, if he may. One of the key things for clients is often the big challenge, the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is bank accounts. We have a lot of players in the ecosystem who are looking to set up. Is what's VARA's position in encouraging banks as key ecosystem players? And I know that in your role as chairman of MIAGBA, you get involved in some of those discussions also. But what are they doing to encourage banks to open accounts for crypto exchanges and participants in the ecosystem?
Excellent question, Depo. So I think that there are a couple of things that VARA is doing, as we know it, right? One is obviously education for the local banks or banks that are interested in considering setting up bank accounts for crypto companies, which is very, very important because the perceived risk and actual risk may have quite a lot of divergence between the two. And that gap has to be bridged. So that is one exercise that is happening. Obviously, there is a policy decision to make Dubai particularly and the UAE generally a jurisdiction of choice for digital assets, virtual assets firms. And that cannot happen without a proper ecosystem, including banking partners. So I know this for a fact that there are discussions happening with various banks at the highest levels to facilitate this process. There are obviously challenges within the banking framework for many different reasons, correspondent being one of them, AML concerns being the other. FIU related matters is another issue. So there are challenges, but I don't see that these challenges will remain as they are today or they have been in the past, considering some of the efforts that are being made by VARA and other regulatory authorities in the UAE.
I'm sure that's really good to hear that, because like we know that's an area that concerns many alike, and in various capacities. The engagement continues on multiple fronts to get the banks to participate in that. I think one other thing I also want to open up to both of you potentially is, when you look at the regulatory framework, Many would ask, what is the potential relationship that, VARA has with some of the other regulators in ensuring that, whether issues around, regulatory arbitrage or just the potential, I don't want to use the word confusion, but that's the only thing that comes to my head, that the clarity required in terms of the scope of what each of those regulators cover. Is there any insight you can share into that?
Yeah, so I think that's probably on everybody's mind in terms of who's doing what, where, how, and where am I exposed, particularly for VASPs, right? So the key thing is, obviously at the federal level there are conversations between VARA and the Securities and Commodities Authority and the central bank. There are challenges, obviously, as this is a new area that everybody has to get their arms around. All of the participants, I'm sure, that are on the call understand, how the US is positioning itself in relation to cryptocurrencies with the recent announcements that have happened with various sort of large market players, and general concerns around money laundering and terrorist financing, et cetera, et cetera. So the key thing is that there needs to be a uniform approach. It is very easy for us as market participants, and so we should as well, to ask for clarity and efficiency, but sometimes it's a difficult thing to achieve, and the regulators are trying to achieve that, but that is not an easy task. There are legacy regulations, there are legacy challenges that need to be overcome by the various authorities. The regulatory setup, I mean, if you just look at how the UAE is from a regulatory standpoint, you have the central bank, you have the Securities and Commodities Authority, you have the FSRA in AGM, you have the DFSA in DIFC, you have VARA now onshore. So the reconciliation between the various parties, some of it is easier, I guess, between financial free zones, but some of that is not so easy, particularly when you consider onshore. But we know, and we have been told that there are significant efforts being made to reconcile this. How long would it take? It's a very, very difficult question to answer. What needs to happen is, if you have an exposure to the Dubai market where you're conducting VASP activities, it is now very clear that you have to get a VARA license. There are some hybrid business models like payment accounts or stored value wallets where you on-ramp and off-ramp fiat, and how would that work between the central bank and VARA? That is currently being determined. How other emirates in the UAE outside of Abu Dhabi will take VARA regulatory framework, whether that would possibly work or not. There obviously are some announcements around Russell Kema setting up its own virtual assets free zone, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of things happening, but I think if we take a step back and look at our business immediately, particularly for VARA related activities, and then in the medium term for sort of the wider UAE and beyond, decisions can be reached. They may not be decisions that are ideal, but decisions that probably put you in the right path.
Fantastic. Really, really good insight, Jahanzeb. Thanks for that. And I'll ask one last question before I go into the Q&A sent in from our participants here today, which I'm sure if we do have prospective applicants to VARA, although we'll appreciate the fact that this is new for them also as a regulatory body. But is there any indication if I, as an applicant, was to provide a full application as described by Mohammed, which is where you potentially need experts to support such applications, but is there any indication as to the VARA process and timelines if a full application is submitted with the relevant documents?
Good question, right to the point. In terms of timelines that have VARA communicated, in our discussion with the authority, they have indicated that they intend to have a timeline of 3 months between the time that the full deck of the application is submitted to the time that the full market product license is issued. Again, that is a perfect scenario. So there might be an additional time taken to answer questions along the way, but that's the time frame that VARA has communicated. Yes.
And I think if I may add something here, this is very, very important for anyone looking to get a VARA FMP to make sure that the right amount of effort is put into creating a correct application. And this is where the challenge lies. Sometimes the documentation can be produced, but the systems and controls from a technology standpoint may be a hurdle that you need to go over. So the suggestion that we always make is that you need to have a very detailed analysis of what you want to do, and whether you have the technology to do what you want to do in line with what the regulator will expect, and then build from there your systems and controls. So when you are having a conversation with the regulator, it is a succinct picture that you are providing to VARA, and where it makes sense to them that the documentation is reflected in actual execution. And that is where the rubber meets the road per se. And that is what VARA will look at. So I think the sort of more traditional businesses where you can produce documentation and execution is more manual, is sort of it gets separated from the VAS business, because the expectation is for you to match the execution and show that the execution meets the system and controls requirement.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Jahanzeb. Mohammed, Jahanzeb, thanks for that really great insight into the workings of VARA from the lens of the firm, JR1 and Partners, and Azako, our RegTech platform that also provides a lot of support for your KYC, KYT processes. I'm going to go into the Q&A questions that have been sent to us by some of the participants. So I'll start right from the top. The first question is, can the entities be branches in DWTC or onshore, or need to be locally incorporated?
I can take on that question. So at the time of submission of the information disclosure questionnaire, and by the time that the regulator will come back to you to provide you the initial approval, so the initial approval document is intended to allow you to proceed with incorporating your company in the UAE or one of the free zones in the UAE. So the intention by the regulator is to have the company based here, have resources based in the Emirate of Dubai.
Thank you, Mohammed. The second question is about tokenizing real estates, which is something that has come up time and time, even before we had more regulations or VARA setup. And the question specifically is, what about tokens backed by real assets?
Yeah, so okay, I can answer that question. I think it's very, very important, and this will be a definition issue. If the token qualifies as a security, it is outside the remit of VARA. If the token qualifies as a virtual asset, it would be within the purview of VARA. So it all really depends on the classification of the token, because you can have you can have digital assets, which are digital representation of a security, and they can be in the form of anything. So it's more of a classification question that needs to be legally answered and justified to VARA. And if they agree that yes, it's a virtual asset, then yes, absolutely, you can do that. In our opinion, that would be difficult to happen. Not impossible, but difficult. I mean, you have NFTs obviously that represent certain parts of or certain ownership, but I think again it's the detail that will determine where you end up.
Thanks, Jahanzeb. The next question, which is a really interesting one. Does VARA allow your compliance officer and MLRO to be outsourced, or do they have to be employed by the entity or its group directly?
I'll take that one as well. So I think it's important. The rules are very clear that the compliance officer has to be a full-time employee. MLRO can be outsourced, but compliance officer has to be a full-time employee. And for those of us who are familiar with the UK setup, they do allow the activities to be of a compliance officer to be given to somebody else, but the compliance officer, registered compliance officer, remains responsible for that. So you can have the compliance officer who's a named person with VARA, but the actual execution of the compliance function can be given to other people within the organization. So or to third parties, as long as they comply with the outsourcing rules. But the MLRO can be outsourced. So this is the key thing. We've had discussions on this topic, and it's been made very, very clear that the focus, and if you read through the rules and regulations that are very specific, that the focus is on ensuring appropriate systems and controls are in place, and that people managing the business, including the compliance function, which has to be completely separated from operations and front office, has the right seniority and the right say within the business to make sure things work properly.
Thanks, Jahanzeb. Questions are coming thick and fast, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. The next question is on cybersecurity. It says, what measures does VARA have in place to ensure the cybersecurity of its host systems and I'll paraphrase that, and consequently protect against potential cyber threats?
So I'll take that on. In terms of IT securities and IT requirements, VARA has published in its rule books guidelines on what kind of requirements that it expects licensees to have in place by the time that the license is issued. Considering the limited time we have, I would prefer to highlight where exactly maybe these rules are in the rule book.
I would want to add something here as well. So basically, I think the key theme here is that the cybersecurity controls need to be in line with international best practice, and that is also underpinned by the Chief Information Security Officer role that is mandated by VARA. Because it's a technology business, you have to make sure that the cybersecurity element of your business is watertight, whatever you want to call that, and they have to be comfortable with the systems and controls in place. Otherwise, obviously, you have a significant issue. And with what has happened in the past in terms of various hacks and so on and so forth, they want to make sure that that does not happen with the VARA regulated entities. Or at least does not happen because there was lack of appropriate systems and controls.
Fantastic. The next question is quite an interesting one. I think it's one we, even as the Middle East, Asia and Africa Crypto and Blockchain Association, is one of the key things we we're looking to address with the regulatory framework. But it is, given the wide scale of the remit of VARA now and requirements for licensing, is there any benefit for firms to consider other financial free zone crypto licenses, for instance, DIFC or ADGM?
Okay. This is a very interesting question, as has been asked by almost every single prospect or client that we have. And it's a very difficult one to answer. It depends on your circumstances. It depends on what type of business you're trying to do, what your goals are. Both the IFC and ADGM allow firms to do business in or from the financial free zones. Now, the from part is a very important part for people to consider. That does not state that basically you can't go into other jurisdictions without a license. That's not the intention. That is based on the risk appetite of each firm. Especially if you're dealing with retail clients, I think it becomes a more risky proposition for the IFC and ADGM firm on the crypto side, but that does not mean that they cannot do it if the risk appetite of the firm is there. VARA, as it stands now, only regulates firms within Dubai. So if you want anything to do with at the federal level, ESCA still the overarching regulator for that. DIFC, ADGM, obviously are generally wholesale jurisdictions, and are well established. So there may be reasons for establishing in the IFC or ADGM for various reasons, including reputation or track record, particularly for ADGM in the virtual asset space, or other commercial reasons that are specific to your business. But the question is, in terms of flexibility of tokens and the way the regulations are, VARA probably is the most flexible in terms of looking at various tokens that potential firms can offer. That may or may not be true for the other free zones.
Thank you, Jahanzeb. I think this next question is one we touched on briefly, but again, I'm sure for quite topical. The question is, what is the situation with opening a bank account? As I heard, the UAE Central Bank has told local banks not to open accounts for crypto providers.
Okay, so again, I think I wouldn't really put too much emphasis on what central bank has told the banks. I think there's a lot of fluff that is going around, which sometimes is not substantiated. We've heard this as well. I think most of the banks are taking an independent position based on how they consider crypto businesses and so on. There are some that have open bank accounts, but maybe not client money accounts. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there is a significant effort at the very top within various regulators and the government bodies, etc., to regularize the situation, because the ambition of the UAE and Dubai in particular becoming a hub for virtual assets businesses will not happen if the bank account situation is not sorted. So it is in the works. How and when it will work out is to be seen.
Thanks for that, Jahanzeb. A really interesting question from Ibrahim here. Aside from the AML, KYC, KYT focus to VARA, what ongoing compliance requirements are there to be aware of, and how does or would the regulatory body align with other jurisdictions?
I'll take this on. In terms of KYT, there is a specific emphasis in the regulation on compliance with the travel rule. We noted that there is requirements in terms of identifying the beneficiaries and senders of virtual assets. In terms of the wider AML requirements, there is similarities between the jurisdictions in terms of reporting requirements, in terms of staffing, policies and procedures. So we might require additional detail to be able to answer this question.
Yeah, and I will jump in here. So I think in terms of the additional stuff, there's a lot of conduct of business requirements, compliance requirements as well. There are risk management requirements, there are IT security requirements, there are financial reporting requirements. If you look at the rules are quite explicit. There is a monthly, quarterly, and annual reporting requirements, which if you kind of work backwards from there, will tell you what you need to have in place from an operational standpoint to be able to report on those. And there's a general expectation that the people are going to be fit and proper, that the compliance officer, I believe, has to have at least minimum of 5 years experience, etc. And then your compliance manual, your conflicts of interest policy for lending and staking, there are different documentation, disclosure requirements, etc., etc. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be in place. And as I mentioned earlier, the documentation has to match the technology in order for the whole sort of process to work, because there's be absolutely no point in putting the documentation and for the technology to do something completely different, which will result in significant issues for anybody who takes that route. So hopefully that answers Ibrahim's question.
Yeah, thanks, Jehazib, and thanks, Mohammed. I think to add to that actually is the fact that, you know, on the question around how does or will the regulatory body align with other jurisdictions, I suppose, as you can imagine, regulators always speak. We know that that is happening here in the UAE, and as crypto continues to get that, you know, global attention, we're more than likely to see the coming together. You know, FATF has done it with AML requirements when it comes to crypto. I think we're going to see more global consensus amongst the regulators, because importantly, we'll reduce any form of regulatory arbitrage. Next question is, how will the regulators approach instances where there is an overlap of the regulatory ambit of VARA and DFSA?
That's a very interesting question, but I think it's a simple answer. If you are VARA regulated, for example, and there's an issue that the DFSA has, generally the DFSA will write to VARA about you, and then VARA will take that on with its regulated community. And the reverse will apply. Let's say if you're a DFSA regulated entity and you're doing something within onshore Dubai that VARA does not like, or is a breach of VARA rules, then obviously they will reach out to the DFSA. Some of the VARA rules are obviously very clear in terms of the fines that are applicable to anyone who breaches the requirements. The enforcement of those fines will be a certain process. Because VARA, obviously, if you're a DIFC firm, VARA cannot enforce its regulatory authority within the DIFC without having the DFSA's consent, and vice versa. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Jehazib. The next one, as we all have seen in the press, Ras Al Khaimah, RAK, has come up with its own new regulations, and the question says, in case RAK comes up with new regulations, will that mean that a company having a VARA license will have to apply for another license to provide services in Ras Al Khaimah?
Yeah, that is to be seen, right? There can be potential passporting because they will all come under federal regulatory framework, hopefully. If they do not, and if it's a free zone from a regulatory standpoint, then it will be a similar situation as the DIFC or ADGM. It's hard to answer that question, but I will find it very difficult to see that, considering the size of Ras Al Khaimah, that they would create certain onerous requirements that make it difficult for VARA regulated firms to operate there. But this is yet to be seen, so it's hard for us to comment at this point.
And if I may add, we don't yet have as much information aside from that announcement yet. There is no clear indication that Ras Al Khaimah intends to have a regulatory authority similar in the scope and similar in responsibilities to VARA. So that is that is yet to be seen.
Yeah, and I think the first applications for Ras Al Khaimah is not going to happen until about June or July, if I remember correctly. So it's very much a space we will look to. Conscious we've got 4 minutes, so we'll try and get through a couple more of these questions before we close out. And if we can't answer any questions, we will take note of those and be in touch to respond to that directly. Would you please scope down the definition of digital currencies as per VARA? I think we can come back to you on that one and make reference to the specific regulatory guidance on that.
Yes, I think it's defined in the rules, and if by scope down you mean we want to create or issue new tokens that may or may not fall under the VARA regulations, I think that's a more in-depth discussion that we can have separately.
And Kieran's question is, okay, this is a hopefully simple one for us to get through. I kindly request you to outline the timeline again from point of initial application to the pre-approval and from pre-approval to the deadline to start operations.
In terms of the timeline, the application process starts with submitting an information disclosure questionnaire, which will be reviewed by VARA, and VARA will come back either with an initial approval saying that you may incorporate, you fit within the regulatory scope, or otherwise. We don't yet have an indication how long will VARA take in terms of coming back on with that initial approval. What we know is from the date of submission of the full application deck for the FMP license till issuance of the license, VARA indicated that it's optimally within 3 months.
Thanks, Mohammed. Just to elaborate on that, as you can appreciate, this is a new process for VARA also. So, the key requirement there is a complete full application. So it's not just making the full application, it's making as complete that application. And as Jahanzeb did highlight, that is where the challenge often is with regards to ensuring that you have collated all of that information that you require to satisfy the requirements. We've got one last question here that we can take before we close, because hopefully it's the last one. Can you elaborate more on the investment management license, specifically if there are any requirements, limitations that companies need to meet operationally when the license is obtained? I think that's one that might require a bit more of a time.
Correct. I think again, it's the systems and controls requirements are very clearly articulated in the rules. How you want to do investment management, the terms and conditions with your clients, your compliance arrangements, your AML arrangements, if you're going to allow staking, lending and borrowing activities, what you need to do from a disclosure standpoint, all that stuff is clearly highlighted in the rules. The real question is how you would need to comply with those, whether you have the systems and controls available or you have to build those out. Basically, that is something that needs to be discussed and understood. And if it is a requirement, we're happy to have a separate conversation on that.
Thanks, Jahanzeb. And the very last question before we close out, and Jahanzeb, I'll probably hand over to you to close out the session. The last question: are there any capital requirements based on the license category?
Yes. Actually, the regulation outlined very clearly the amount of capital that is required for each activity in its rulebook. There is a base capital requirement, and additionally, there is a variable requirement depending on annual overhead expenses. So the for instances where there is both requirements, the higher of which will apply. So yes, there is quite clear information on this.
Thank you, Mohammed. And I want to say thanks to the audience before I hand over to Jehanzeb for your questions, and thanks, Mohammed, and Jehanzeb for going through the questions. On that note, Jehanzeb, I'll hand over to you for any closing remarks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dapo. Thank you, Mohammed, for your valuable contribution. Really appreciate that, and thank you for all the participants who have joined us. And again, we are very cognizant of your time, and really appreciate that you've taken your important, valuable time and spent it with us. We'll be happy to continue the discussion. If you need to reach out to us, and if you have any further questions, please reach out to either Dapo or myself, and to our emails, or you can reach out to J1 & Partners, info@J1 & Partners, or Dapo @J1 & Partners, or Jehanzeb @J1 & Partners, or Mohammed @J1 & Partners. We'll be happy to assist. Hopefully this is one of many webinars that we will be conducting over the course of this coming year, and you have found that valuable, and looking forward to continue the discussion. So thank you very much for attending. Really appreciate it. Take care. Happy Ramadan, and inshallah we'll have another session and speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.